Welcome back to 420 Chief, a podcast that's all about educating and informing people about the medicinal benefits of 420. Always consume responsibly and consult your doctor before trying it for yourself. Today, I have a very special guest. This is Dr. Amy Redford, former Army veteran, almost 9 years active service. Then she moved on to get her doctorate degree in IT and just has an incredible story of overcoming and healing, not just through the military, but her own personal struggles and sacrifices. So, with that said, I'm going to introduce Dr. Amy Redford.
Hey, Chief.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
No, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'd had the opportunity to speak with you last week about a little bit about you and your struggles. And I wanted to just kind of jump right into that because the more I hear about the stories and the struggles of the female veterans, even some that I'd served with, it's so eye-opening for me, and there's so many stigmas associated behind that, and I'm so grateful to hear your story and thankful that you are sharing that with not just me, but others that have been through the same thing, and not enough people are talking about it. And so to raise awareness to that and how you've overcome those things, the best way to do it is to talk about it. So I'm just going to jump right in and tell us a little bit about you and then your transition into the Army. So a little background on you.
Okay. Well, I was born in 1965. I was born the third child of four, and in a family who really didn't support me very much. But that's a very long story. Um, Essentially, I needed direction. I needed something that was going to give me some sort of a career because even when I graduated from high school, which took me a little bit longer than it probably should have, um, I graduated in '83, and I did not join the service until I was 20. That was in 1985. Um, and that was right around the same time that the Army was integrating the Women's Army Corps into regular Army. So I actually joined the Women's Army Corps initially. They made me wait 6 months and then took me off to basic training. So I was at the very tail end of the Women's Army Corps being incorporated into the regular Army. And let me tell you, it was definitely a journey.
Yeah.
Blazed some trails there.
I believe that, and especially being that young, not knowing what to expect in such a new program, nobody can really explain to you what's gonna happen or make you feel what you're about to experience.
Oh yeah. I remember very distinctly our drill sergeants told us that we were the first battalion of female at Fort Dix when we were in basic training. So not all of us made it. I can tell you that. I think it was down to about half by the time we graduated and moved
Wow,
on
that's
to our
crazy
enlist.
retention if you think about it. That
Yeah,
really is.
yeah. It really was. But I can tell you right now there are not a lot of women veterans out there. I have trouble finding them.
Yeah.
I really do. I find a lot more male veterans out there who are struggling, but female veterans don't talk. We don't talk not only about what we've been through, but what we're still going through, and I think that's a real disservice.
And I think it's difficult to find someone that you trust or that you're comfortable talking to, especially when it comes to this, because there are so few female veterans talking about it. And I can say that's true from my experience attending multiple veteran meetups and veteran support groups and veteran lives. I've seen so many more male veterans now coming out talking about their experiences and just so few female veterans, and I've heard and understand kind of better now why that is, but you're absolutely correct, there's not a lot. So thank you again for talking to us about it. So
You're
can
very
you
welcome.
let's walk us through your Army career. This is a crazy time, so tell us what that kinda looked like through that 8, almost 9 years.
Well, I started off at Fort Dix, went through Fort Ben Harrison, which no longer exists in Indiana, for my MOS training. And again, we were probably one of the first units that had women in it. So it was a difficult transition. They didn't have a lot of resources for us. A lot of the rules we were told not to follow, like cutting our hair, but we were told we had to put it up certain ways, and it was very specific, and it was constantly changing. So eventually, I ended up cutting off my hair anyway. By the time I got done with my MOS training, I ended up in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, where the ISEC and the Fifth Signal Command was. And very quickly, they picked up on my ability to be very logical and a big fighter. So I went through probably a good year and a half of investigations on my background and who I was and where I came from, and got all kinds of security clearances and ended up over at the Pentagon for a long time, right outside Falls Church, Virginia. From there, I got married to a high school sweetheart who also joined the service. But by the time we ended up moving to Germany, he was staff sergeant, and I was being considered for OCS. That all kind of fell through. And eventually, when we divorced, I left Germany, came back home, stayed out of the service for about 6 months when I had some foot surgery done. Another long story. And went to the reserve unit, the 6218th out of Bell, California, because I felt lost. I felt really out of place. And I didn't know what to do with myself. So the only thing I knew how to do was go back to the military, and I did. And from there, I think it was probably what, 6, 7 months later, we all left and went to Kuwait. And I was there until the first part of '92. Came back home and said, nope, I'm done. I'm not doing that again. There's a certain amount of innocence I lost doing that. Now, I was not in combat by any means, but I was in a combat zone, and that was enough. I don't know how World War II or Vietnam nurses did it. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in Kuwait, actually, that's where I met Scooter, in 2010 and 2011 was in Kuwait, and while we were there, it was much nicer than it had been previously, because we had, stable structures and things like that, it wasn't a tent
Yeah.
city.
Yeah, when I got there, it was pretty much tent city. I spent a lot of time in Doha, and I actually still have all of the dressings that I used to wear over my head, because at the time they would not allow women off the base alone. And for 3 years, I didn't go out of my house when I got back home alone, ever. It took me a while. It really did. Um, I was the person that everybody went to and was basically unseen. I was the secretary, the paper pusher, the gopher, um, and probably ran into a lot of these people that I'm now reconnecting or connecting with that probably didn't even know I was there. But it is what it is. And that's where I really got a lot of my IT professional experience from. I've been in the field for about 30 years. So once I got out of the military, I realized that not only was I going to get questioned about my service, and I did, I was called a liar, I don't know how many times, told to prove it, which cracks me up. Like, okay, really? Do I have to prove it? Yeah, there was an event that I went to. I was doing some research, and I was invited to the National Defense University in DC while I was attending Purdue. And there was a woman there who challenged me to 20 push-ups right there in the hallway. So I did, because they didn't believe me. So I was like, okay, there you go.
A lot of
So,
stigmas. There's a lot of stigmas around not just being a military veteran, but especially being a female veteran. And
oh yeah.
I want to stop for just a second and cover, like, you've faced those as a female veteran with other veterans. And can you kind of explain to our listeners a little bit about what that stigma looks like for females in the military, the stigma that they feel being in the military with their peers?
From someone who was put into the regular army when it was brand new for them, It was almost like we were infiltrating the bro club. And not only was it, I mean, it was almost like it wasn't enough that we had decided and volunteered to serve, but we had gotten through basic training. That wasn't enough. We still had to prove ourselves. And we were targets because there weren't a lot of women, and we almost had to either fight each other or band together in order to protect ourselves. Um, the amount of assaults and harsh language, and I don't mean just cussing because that's typical. I still do it. But I mean just demeaning, horrible things said right to your face. And you can't react. You can't do anything.
Y
Um,
Doc, this is one of those things that I look back on and reflect seeing in my career and realizing back then, seeing and hearing this, a lot of people would be like, "Oh, that's how we joke around," or "That's our sick or perverse sense of humor," and look the other way or completely ignore it, So, it is, culturally something that we need to talk about and bring more awareness to, especially when we, like myself, have been so desensitized to these types of things, not even considering the impact that that's making on someone else's life, how they feel, and how that, affects their work, So, thank you for talking about
not
that.
just their work, but really their everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely, every day, and then the way you feel, and it's a whole thing. And then let's talk about the flip side of that, coming out of the service, the stigmas that you faced being a female veteran now in the civilian world. Can you kinda talk us through a little bit of that?
You bring it home with you. As I've heard many of the men say, you bring it home with you, and you do. But I think for women, it's a little harder to talk about because there's so much more that we have to deal with that men don't, such as SA. I know I can't necessarily say that word, but it happens more frequently than is reported. I can tell you that. It happened more frequently to me than I reported because you really want to see the good in people. Now, after I got back, again, it was hard because there was a great deal of shame associated with it for me. Um, and it took me probably a good 10 years or more to even admit to people that I was in the service. I wanted to go back to normal so bad that I would have done anything I could to look and act like it, even if I wasn't. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't admit it.
And what kinda support did you get from your family? You wanna cover that briefly?
None. None whatsoever. My dad even told me when I was in the service, when I went back to Florida to see him, that he was disappointed in me. I asked him if he would have been proud for me, and he said no. He was disappointed because he didn't believe women belonged in the military.
Yeah, that's another one of those stigmas that I wanted to bring up, that I don't think a lot of people realize are a real thing. So you went from feeling unseen, unheard, like you didn't do anything to coming out and almost like your own family is validating that feeling back in you just completely
Yes.
like you didn't even do it.
Yes.
So
Now,
that's
this is coming from a World War II Navy vet who said that to me.
yeah.
And I thought, if anything, he would have been proud of the fact that I was the first woman in the family to ever serve in the military. Didn't matter to him.
Yeah, that whole desensitization, it's not what he had seen nor what he had been trained. So it wasn't, he wasn't ready mentally to feel that. Um, so after your military service, I want to talk a little bit. You had a diagnosis of GBS, and can you talk a little bit about what that is, how you got that, and how it's had an everlasting impact in your life?
I went to the University of South Florida and took a temporary position as a professor. It was a visiting professor position. And got paid well. It was only supposed to be 9 months. So I left my husband and my daughter up here in Kentucky, went down to Florida, and by force, they told me I had to get a flu shot because I was around other staff, students, blah, blah, blah. I told them I don't do that. I am healthy as a horse. At the time, I was walking 8 miles a day, and I couldn't have been healthier. Loving it. But I had to do it, or I had to leave, and I didn't want to leave the job, so I did. And literally 2 weeks later, I was numb from the shoulders up and from the waist down. And everywhere that I could feel just hurt. I had gone to numerous doctors. I went to two separate hospitals, and I was treated like I was a drug seeker. I was left to wait in one hospital waiting room for 7.5 hours before they finally told me, "Oh, you just have anxiety because you're a veteran." What? Okay. So I ended up going home, and I called the VA the next day and had to drive myself there on my own. Literally could not feel anything. It took them 3 days to finally figure out what it was, while I laid there in pain and crying because, and I don't cry, but I could not feel anything. I couldn't walk from here to that door just to go to the restroom. And after 3 days, they finally found out it was Guillain-Barré. And it was an autoimmune disease that was caused either by a virus or a vaccine. And I knew exactly what happened. So I was in the hospital for about 10 days. They gave me an cocktail, essence. They call it an IVIG. They saved my life. And I have my issues with the VA, but this hospital went out of their way to take care of me and find out what was going on. And literally less than a week after, I had to drive myself back to Kentucky by myself because I had gotten fired. Didn't work for a week, lost the contract, came home, and I don't remember the trip. But what happened from there was I had to literally relearn how to walk. I've gone through now over 10 years of some therapy, but not through the VA. It's been my own therapy. And what I have found that helps me the most is actually using 420. Every medicine that the VA ever tried to put me on didn't work, or it kept me so bogged down in my head, I felt like I was in a cloud. And I literally could not function. I teach programming, and I am a university professor, so I have to be clear thinking, and I do a lot of things legally as well as advocate for homeless veterans. So I couldn't take all those drugs.
So what kind of symptoms um, are you using 424 to combat the GPS? So can you explain how the GPS has impacted you specifically and how you have found relief in 420 at, and how you consume as well?
I went through my education by starting out at the University of Kentucky and got a biology degree. So I am legally and essentially, in all sense of the words, a biotechnologist. I really delved into holistic care once this diagnosis and once I got home. So I started learning about what was happening to me. What happens with this particular illness is that the myelin sheath that surrounds the axons of the nerves inside your body was essentially dying. My body was essentially attacking it, so it was shutting down. That's where the numbness came from. And there's really no way for those myelin sheaths to recreate themselves without that immunoglobulin called IVIG. So that's what the hospital did for me initially. That brought on the initial healing, but from there, there are residual symptoms that I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. There's constantly spasms, muscle spasms, skeletal spasms. Those are the worst. Organ spasms. There's constant 24/7 pain. And it comes and goes and shows up in different places in different ways. And what's worse, I think, is probably the reactions that my body has regarding the weather. If the barometric pressure starts doing this, which it can do here in Kentucky sometimes, particularly in spring, my body reacts almost like I have MS. It's horrifying. And like I said, the medicines that the doctors put me on, these nerve pain medicines and all of these other sorts of chemical drugs, just were not doing it, was not working. I had to increase dosages every time, and I just went, enough, enough, enough.
So you've tried out 420, and I know that you, in talking with you previously, you had experimented with that at a younger age.
It
But
did.
as you were going through this and feeling these symptoms, at what point did you think, you know what, I'm going to try 420? And then from there, I would like to hear, your preferred methods of consumption and specifically what you've noticed it help you with, because obviously you said you were in pain all the time and you started noticing different areas of your body. I would imagine getting off of some of the medications and doing your independent research, um, you you've been able to kinda narrow it down, I would say. I would like to hear about your regimen and how it helps you with this.
Yeah, I am a researcher by nature, even before I became an IT doctor, even before I had my dissertation to do. So I'm just constantly delving into research. There's a lot of research that was done here in Kentucky long before they even legalized it. And that's part of the reason why I'm speaking out now. They've only just really legalized it here. So I know I have,
Medicinally, they
yeah,
just medicinally legalized it in Kentucky.
medicinally. And
Congratulations, by the way, on that.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And fortunately for me, because of what I do, I'm very well connected. I've got a lot of connections throughout universities and biological organizations all over the country. I have a friend of mine that works for OSHA, and he introduced me to gummies.
Yeah,
And oh my, I finally got a good night's sleep after I cannot tell you how long. Because at night, the pain is magnified. And of course, you know how at night you're just sort of laying there and your brain just keeps working and working and working.
yeah.
It's tough to shut it off. And for someone who does as much as I do throughout the day, it's really hard for me to shut that brain off of mine. So I was complaining to him one day, and he introduced me to gummies. He said, "Here, try this tonight when you go to bed and see if this works for you." And oh, wow, I got the best sleep I've had in years. So that was really the kickoff for me. Um, I do prefer gummies, particularly at night. I prefer them late in the afternoon when I know I can't take ibuprofen anymore. So I can't take anything like that because now, after all those years of trying to keep off of the pain medications the VA would have had me on, I took a little bit too much and it's affected my liver in ways that I don't even want to talk about. We can talk about that later. But I can't take any kind of NSAIDs anymore. So any kind of pain relief, I have to find an alternative methods. I prefer to smoke it throughout the day only because it makes me more focused and I can control it better.
That's a big one I love to talk about, and I would like to zero in on. You had mentioned earlier that you are a professor and you teach actually coding, correct? Like
Yeah.
Python?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually retired at IT, and I was an IT manager. I did not get technically certified with that, but I do have a good understanding of it, and I did a bit of it in college myself, enough to pass the class to never do it again, to know that it's not for me because I'm not focused enough. I'm too all over the place. That's too tedious for me. So something like that, or if I'm doing my website work, I do know specific strains that'll help me calm down and just focus to get the task done. Have you found like what specific strains have you found have worked best for you, whether it be to focus or to get sleep or for your pain? Have you focused in on the specific strains or terpenes?
No, I have not, only because I experiment with them quite a bit more than probably most other people would. Um, because of some of the connections that I have, and with the industry now being legalized, there's a lot more out there that are willing to allow someone like me, who is a legitimate researcher, do that kind of research. So I'm using all kinds of different strains.
I've
I
got
do
to
know.
I got to stop you and plug this. Strains for
Oh
Pain.
yeah,
I'm going to send you my book, Dr. Redford, because
thank you.
that's what it is. It's a guide for doing your own independent research. I've got some terpenes listed out here that are medicinally studied for specific types of healing, but the rest of the book is to document your own journey, and what I mean by that is to pay attention to what works, and for
Mhm.
someone like yourself that's willing to experiment and try new strains and pay attention to how it really is impacting them because you need it to, you're gonna remember what works best and what doesn't work, and specifically for you. So, Strains for Pains, you can find it on my website. I'll definitely have to mail you one. I'll get your address and I'll
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'll tell you the reason why I do that because I and I don't want to make anybody feel sorry for me by any means because I deal with PTSD, I deal with depression, I have chronic pain. You know, there's a lot of little issues that I've had experience with that different strains will do different things with the different symptoms. So I'm more than willing to try different things because I can really pinpoint what it was doing for me and for specific things. And I write it all down.
And I noticed earlier you had said you're wanting to come out now and talk about it because it's legalized in Kentucky. Can you kind of help explain some of the stigmas that you've had to break as far as being a cannabis consumer, especially being in a state where it just now, January 1st of this year, was legalized? Like, what are some of those stigmas you've had to face?
Wow. Oh, that's a good one. I've had to be very, very quiet about my use, particularly with regard to my job. I've told my physicians through the VA only because I know they can't report me. And I'll tell you the truth. I've had many of my physicians applaud what I'm doing. I had a heart attack in 2020 that killed me twice. And it came upon very swiftly. It was a widowmaker, so I'm very blessed to be here right now. And they tried to put me on heart medications, all those chemical concoctions, and I stayed on them for about 6 months so they'd be happy. And eventually, I just took myself off, just like I did with the GBS medications. I slowly weaned myself off. See, I'm dangerous. I was spent 20 years in the medical field as well. And I tell all my doctors, you can talk to me like a nurse. You don't have to color code it like I don't know what you're talking about. So I can talk to them as well in the same way. And they understand that about me. Um, because of what I do, I am the perfect candidate to explain to people that, first of all, it's not a gateway drug. And not only that, it is such a help for people who have PTSD, for people who have depression, for people who have cancer, for people who have a number of illnesses and diseases out there. It was put here on earth by God. And it is honestly the one thing that my cardiologist has told me that she is happy that I'm using, as well as dandelions, because I'm not taking any heart medication. And here I am still kicking. And not only that, healthier than I've ever been. My health has been improving because of it. It makes me go outside. It helps me focus on my work. That alone should tell people that the stigmas surrounding the use of this particular drug is completely unfounded. I've got research that for some reason they won't allow for peer research to be so that the professionals won't look at it, but there's tons of it out there. And I've got drawers of them over here. But I am the perfect example that it doesn't make you a couch potato either. Because through all of this, I've not only achieved two bachelor's degrees, a master's degree from a top 10 university, as well as an IT doctorate. It makes me focused. It helps me keep doing what I'm doing. And that stigma right there is probably one of the hardest ones to break.
Yeah, and I applaud you for your consistency and your continual research and personal improvement. So, I, for one, am proud of you, and I understand very much what you're saying because proving to people you're not just a couch potato, but you can still get things accomplished and be goal driven is one of the hardest stigmas to break. And people are like, how are you even doing? How do you even do anything? I'm like, well, I I do this smartly. I start slow. I know my limits. I
Yep.
know what works for me and how it works for me. and I know myself.
Yep.
So thank you very much for that. I did wanna ask you because you said you can't even take any types of medicines, but what would happen if you didn't, um, have 420 for a day and a night? What would the symptoms be, and what would that experience be like for you without it?
There have been times in the past, and particularly since it's been legalized, that I've had to go without, and it's agony. I can't function. I don't even want to get out of bed. And there are, fortunately for my job, I'd love to be back in the classroom, but unfortunately, this illness has certain ticks that go along with it, and I don't want to be further stigmatized by it. So I teach online, and I do a lot of video conferencing with my students, but I think one of the most important things that people need to realize, particularly with someone who deals with a lot of the issues, that some people may deal with some of them and some people may deal with some other ones, but never really, you don't really find a lot of people that have a lot of them like I do together. So I think more so than anything else, it's important for people to understand that this is what keeps me functional throughout the day. This is what keeps me focused. This is what keeps me going. And I would not be able to take care of my family, work my job, or even step outside of the house sometimes without it, because it helps me understand that, number one, there are other people out there going through far worse than I am, and number two, it keeps me calm, because I would love to be able to act out in anger or in frustration from all of the issues that I deal with on a daily basis that go unseen, because this is a disability that is so easily forgotten because it's so unseen. It makes me remember that I'm not alone.
Yeah, never truly alone. On that note, if you were to give a message specifically to, some of our veterans out there that have never tried this or still have those stigmas behind 420, what would your words of wisdom or message be to them specifically?
You really won't hurt yourself or anything by just giving it a chance. Even just looking into it, talking to other people, reaching out, because you're not alone. There are ways that we are able to help each other and guide each other. So, what may work for me may not necessarily work for someone else, but knowing that you're not alone and there's a safe place to be when you do decide to experiment is utmost. That's extremely important.
Agreed.
And there's a lot of people out there who are willing to be that safe place for you.
Absolutely. Very wise. Thank you for that. So we've talked about your military career. We've talked about GBS. We've talked about your 420 journey. Let's talk a little bit about your mission and your passion right now. Let's talk about Rules 3D, where that came from, and what you're doing with it now.
Wow. Okay. You need to go away. Sorry, phone call. Um, Rules came about when I was a graduate student at Purdue. I met a man who became my mentor, and he had this wonderful idea because I was so involved in 3D virtual technology, particularly gaming. And I, truth be known, I was in the service when they were creating the internet. It was the ARPANET and the Ethernet at the time. So essentially, you may as well mainline me to the dark web. I can get in and out of there, find anything you want.
And don't
um,
want
you don't want to know what I know. Anyway, I was getting involved in 3D virtual technology, and I really was interested in online schooling because there was this period of time during the 80s and 90s where you could see these commercials on TV, get your degree and it only takes 4 days. No, no, no. We were talking about getting true accreditation from legitimate universities and colleges to do online instruction because it was the new thing. I mean, we really needed to make it work. So he and I really got together and worked on this. And gosh, this was back in 2009. He came up with this brilliant idea to go into a virtual platform called Second Life. And that platform we were introducing our students to, because as a graduate student, I was also allowed to teach. And I loved it. I was having a ball. But what he did was he decided he was going to figure out a way that people could send each other gifts from this virtual world to someone in real life. And it worked. Well, the university picked up on that, and we applied for a grant to create a virtual lab that we could study what these students were doing, not only in the virtual world, but what their physical reactions were to in the real world in this lab. And we had ended up getting a $5 million grant, and no sooner did we get the grant, but the director comes in and takes it away. Gave it to somebody else. So that pretty much killed that. Now, the reason they quoted this for was because I was a graduate student. I wasn't an actual instructor. I wasn't paid by the university, blah, 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 whatever. So he and I pretty much separated from all of that. He went down to Georgia, and unfortunately, he died. He died quite early. He was actually a year and a half younger than me, but unfortunate circumstance, he died. So he left me with this business that now was worth $1.9 million, and we had contracts coming out my ears, and I thought, oh wow, he was the one who had the degree. He was the one who legitimized the company, not me. I was just the lackey. I was the one doing all the work. What am I going to do with this thing? So I shut it all down and decided to go back to school and get my degree. So after I got my degree, I started Rewelz, and Rewelz3D became, initially started out as programming for serious gaming, virtual programming that also included artificial intelligence to make training simulations for people who worked in fire, police, disaster relief, emergency, all those kinds of people, as well as emergency medicine, because one of the things they've been doing is creating serious gaming for people in medicine and things like that. So I started off doing that. It didn't work out so well. So eventually somebody said to me, well, you're creating all these 3D universes. Can you create one in real life? And I went, well, yeah, in resin. Then I started making jewelry, and that's where Rewelz3D ended up getting on TikTok. So
And you
I
have a
still make
website.
3D virtual simulations.
People can check that out at www.rewelz, or it's R-E.
Rewelz 3D, number 3D.com.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen it. Some beautiful, beautiful jewelry on there.
Thank you. And you know what's really important though, is Rewelz supports veterans and particularly veteran spouses. I have employed a couple of people doing some programming for me that were veterans, and I'm always supporting veterans' causes. As a matter of fact, yesterday I went and found me a homeless veteran, and he contacted me back today. So I got a little bit of work to do today.
I always tell people, they say, how can I help? Well, support looks different, but if you don't know, you can always start in your community just like that. So that's an amazing thing. And I know that when we had talked before, you also were very passionate about another organization called 917.
Yeah,
You want to touch on that real quick and let people know what their mission is and what they do?
917 Society is probably one of my favorites, and the reason why I support this society is because they go out of their way and for free provide the U.S. Constitution and the amendments. And usually these are things that are given out to people when they're getting their citizenship. Okay, the legal way, mind you. Now, it's called 917 Society because that is Constitution Day. And what they do is they provide middle school students these booklets for free. If you contact them and tell them what you want and what you're looking for, they'll get back in touch with you. Now, what I did is I reached out to them and I had them send me 200 of them, because the high school my daughter goes to, just literally right up the road from here, is where we all go to vote in my county. And I go there every time they shut down the school to go vote, and I hand these booklets out to everybody. Why? Why do you think I do that?
Me? I'll tell you why I think.
Yeah.
So I
Why?
feel like so many people don't know their rights. And I, for one, have experience with this. in the past, and when I realized my children don't know what, like, a police officer is allowed to do or say to them, that
Right.
really concerned me. So it's like, you know what? I understand. So for me, it's like, know what your rights are because people are taking advantage of that
Yeah.
everywhere. And you have to take care of yourself sometimes, and you need to know what that means and what your options are. Because so many times we feel like we don't have any options or we're in the wrong when in reality we are not. So to me, that's what it means.
Well, you have to also understand they've taken civics out of the schools, out of public schools. My husband and I moved to this county because it is one of the best school systems in the state. They don't have civics classes. They're not teaching these kids this. They don't say the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. That was a requirement when I went to school.
Yeah, times have changed a lot, and I think that they'll continue to change. But I did want to shout that out because I thought that was a neat mission. When I
Thank
think
you.
about my own children, honestly, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they don't know their rights." And so many adults really don't anymore. We don't talk about it enough. We don't challenge it, so I have been in situations where I was challenged to know my rights, and that's when I realized, "Oh, man, it's important to know, to take care of ourselves."
What
But
scares me today, Chief, is how many people not only don't know their rights, but are freely giving them away before they even know what they are. That scares me. I served this country because of these rights. I believed in this enough to where I was willing to give my life, and many others did as well. And for the generation today to not be taught what their rights are is a travesty in this country.
I agree. I really do. And I wanna say thank you so much, for taking the time today. It's been great to get to know you better, and if people wanna get to know more or connect with you, I know you've got your contact information on your website, www.rewelz, that's REWLZ 3D.com, and she is also on TikTok, Rewelz3D. Thank you again. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all of your independent research search, but more importantly, more than anything, thank you for sharing your story, and how you've overcome and how that's really helped you because so many people are scared to talk about a lot of these things that we talked about today, not just with the 420 journey, but also your story of overcoming many, many stigmas throughout your lifetime. So I, for one, am grateful for you and grateful to know you. So if anybody wants to get to know Rules better, please check out her website, get to know her mission. With that being said, I'm going to close us out. Thank you, Dr. Radford. And thank you again for tuning in to 420 Chief, where my mission is really to get these powerful stories of healing and overcoming out there. If you know of, or if you are yourself a veteran and you use plant healing to overcome and you have an amazing story or know someone, please let me know. Put it in the comments, reach out directly. Again, support the mission right here, 420chief.net. And as always, lead with love